In 1892, the richest man in America hid in a castle in Scotland while his business partner sent armed guards to crush a workers' strike back home. Men died. The press called him a coward and a hypocrite. 9 years later, that same man sold his company for the equivalent of over $13 billion in today's money, and then spent the rest of his life trying to give nearly all of it away. Andrew Carnegie, immigrant, telegraph boy, steel magnate, strikebreaker, and, by his own design, the most generous philanthropist in American history. This is a story about ambition, contradiction, and what happens when a man builds his entire identity around two completely opposite ideas at the same time. Let's get into it. Andrew Carnegie was born on November 25, 1835, in Dunfermline, Scotland, a small weaving town. His father, William Carnegie, was a handloom weaver, a trade that was being rapidly destroyed by the Industrial Revolution. By the 1840s, mechanized looms had made the family's livelihood nearly worthless. In 1848, when Andrew was 13, the Carnegie family borrowed money for passage and emigrated to the United States, settling in Allegheny, Pennsylvania, near Pittsburgh. They arrived with essentially nothing. Here's your first unusual fact. Carnegie's first job in America, at age 13, was as a bobbin boy in a cotton mill, working 12-hour days, 6 days a week, for $1.20 a week. That's roughly $45 a week in today's money, for 12-hour days, 6 days a week. He hated it. But he didn't stay there long. Within a year, he became a telegraph messenger boy in Pittsburgh. And this is where everything changed. Carnegie memorized the locations of every business in downtown Pittsburgh so he could deliver messages faster. He taught himself Morse code by sneaking into the telegraph office at night and practicing on the equipment. He rose quickly, from messenger boy to telegraph operator, and by age 18 he was working as the personal telegraph operator and assistant to Thomas A. Scott, a superintendent at the Pennsylvania Railroad. This was the connection that changed his life. Through his railroad connections, Carnegie learned how capital worked, how to invest, how to leverage credit, how to spot opportunities before everyone else did. Thomas Scott personally helped Carnegie make his first investment, 10 shares of Adams Express stock, financed with a loan Carnegie's mother secured by mortgaging the family home. That investment paid its first dividend within months. Carnegie reportedly said it was the first time he'd ever made money without working for it, and the experience permanently changed how he thought about wealth. During the Civil War, Carnegie worked for the War Department organizing military telegraph and rail transportation. And here's an uncomfortable fact many biographies skip over. Like many wealthy Northerners, Carnegie paid for a substitute to serve in his place when he was drafted in 1864. This was completely legal under the law at the time, but it would follow him as a point of criticism for the rest of his life, especially given his later public statements about duty and sacrifice. After the war, Carnegie saw the future, and the future was steel. He had visited Britain and seen the Bessemer process, a revolutionary new method for mass-producing steel cheaply and quickly. American railroads were expanding rapidly and desperately needed steel rails that wouldn't shatter under heavy use like iron did. Carnegie built the Edgar Thomson Steel Works near Pittsburgh in 1875, and over the next 2 decades, through a combination of technological investment, vertical integration, owning the iron mines, the coal mines, the railroads, and the ships that moved the materials, and absolutely relentless cost-cutting, he built Carnegie Steel into the largest and most profitable steel operation in the world. By the 1890s, Carnegie Steel was producing more steel than all of Great Britain. In 1892, while Carnegie was vacationing at his castle in Scotland, Skibo Castle, his business partner, Henry Clay Frick, was running Carnegie Steel's operations back home, including the massive Homestead steelworks near Pittsburgh. Carnegie and Frick had decided to break the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers Union by cutting wages and locking workers out of the plant. Frick brought in 300 armed Pinkerton detective agents, transporting them up the Monongahela River on barges to retake the plant by force. What followed was essentially a small war. Striking workers and their families lined the riverbanks with rifles. A gun battle erupted between the Pinkertons and the strikers that lasted most of a day. By the time it ended, at least 7 workers and 3 Pinkerton agents were dead, and dozens more were wounded. The Pennsylvania State Militia, 8,500 troops, was eventually called in to restore order and protect the strikebreakers Frick brought in to replace the locked-out Union workers. And where was Carnegie during all this? In Scotland. He had deliberately distanced himself, communicating with Frick via telegraph, but staying physically removed from the violence. When asked about it later, he reportedly told friends the events at Homestead were the greatest tragedy of his life. But he never publicly broke with Frick over the decision, and the lockout succeeded. The Union was crushed at Homestead for decades. This contradiction, a man who wrote essays about the dignity of workers while his factories used armed mercenaries against them, became the defining criticism of Carnegie's entire legacy. In 1901, Carnegie sold Carnegie Steel to financier J.P. Morgan, who merged it with other companies to form U.S. Steel, the first billion-dollar corporation in history. The sale price was $480 million, equivalent to roughly $13 to $17 billion today, depending on the calculation method used. The deal was reportedly negotiated and agreed upon in a single meeting. Carnegie wrote his asking price on a piece of paper. Morgan looked at it, agreed without negotiation, and shook his hand. Carnegie later told friends he should have asked for $100 million more. Morgan would have paid it without blinking. At age 65, Carnegie became, by most estimates, the richest man in the world. This is the part of the story that genuinely is remarkable, regardless of how you feel about how he made the money. Over the final 18 years of his life, Carnegie systematically gave away the vast majority of his fortune, an estimated $350 million, equivalent to many billions today. His signature philanthropic project was libraries. Carnegie funded the construction of 2,509 libraries across the English-speaking world, 1,679 of them in the United States alone. His model was specific and somewhat strict. Carnegie would pay for the building, but the local community had to provide the land and commit to ongoing funding for books, staff, and maintenance. Many of these buildings, known to this day as Carnegie Libraries, are still in use as public libraries, museums, or community centers across small towns throughout America. He also funded Carnegie Mellon University, the Carnegie Institution for Science, Carnegie Hall in New York City, and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, an organization still active today, focused on preventing war. In his final years, Carnegie became deeply preoccupied with international peace, donating millions to build what he called a Temple of Peace at The Hague in the Netherlands, a building intended to host international arbitration to resolve disputes between nations without war. When World War I broke out in 1914, Carnegie was reportedly devastated. He had genuinely believed that economic interdependence between nations had made large-scale war obsolete. Friends described him as withdrawing from public life almost entirely after the war began, spending his final years in poor health and apparent grief over what he saw as the collapse of everything he'd hoped for. He died on August 11, 1919, at his estate in Lenox, Massachusetts, at age 83, just 9 months after the war he'd hoped to prevent finally ended. By any measure, his impact on American life is staggering. The steel he produced built the skeleton of modern America. The bridges, the skyscrapers, the rail network that connected the entire country.